Hi, I'm Dr. Sophie Bostock, and this is my Saga Spaces Talk.
Hello there and welcome. I'm Gavin Ramshaw and I'll be your presenter for this afternoon's Saga Spaces Talk. Now, Saga Spaces is your community, a place where you can experience the joy of discovery with live online talks from some of the most prominent minds and leading thinkers, specially curated for you. Every one of our live talks is an opportunity for you to learn something enriching and empowering with practical tips and valuable take-home advice. And we hope your experience today will leave you wanting more. And they're also fully interactive as well, so you can ask questions and tell us how you feel with our one-tap emojis. Now, we all need sleep, don't we? But modern life often stops us from getting the quality and the quantity of sleep required to live life to the full. And as many of us know, good quality sleep gets harder to achieve as we get older. So today we are joined by Dr. Sophie Bostock, a sleep evangelist on a mission to help people to improve their lives by helping them to sleep better. Now, in her talk today, Sophie will explore why good quality sleep can help you live healthier for longer. She'll uncover what controls when and how well we sleep, helping us to understand the effects of aging on sleep. And no doubt she'll share some practical tips and advice as well on how to get better quality sleep. So Sophie, it is great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you, Gavin. It's really good to be here.
Excellent stuff. Quick question before we start. You're a sleep scientist, a sleep evangelist. Does that mean that you always sleep well?
I definitely sleep better than I used to. I am entirely guilty of sleep neglect. I think this probably started when I was a teenager and then probably actually got worse when I became a medical student. And then I went to go and work for a digital health startup called Sleepio. And my job then involved researching and promoting the importance of sleep. Of course, ironically, at this time, I was completely neglecting my own sleep. And this all came to a head one day when I'd agreed to go and take some friends climbing in Dorset. This is on the back of kind of months of sleep debt. And that day I made some truly unwise sleep-deprived decisions, which culminated in a really nasty fall. And I had to be helicoptered off the cliff, and I spent a week in hospital having my ankle reconstructed with 3 titanium pins. And in the months of rehab that followed, I had plenty of time to reflect and also plenty of time to catch up on sleep. And I genuinely felt like a new person. And following that was kind of 5 years ago, I've really made it my mission to try and help other people to avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And I would say that, now the thing that's really changed is that my mindset around sleep is different. And I prioritize sleep because I know how good it makes me feel.
Oh, fair play. Really appreciate you sharing that. And also I like the fact you've got Dream in the background of your living room there. So lots to look forward to then with this Saga Spaces talk. Dr. Sophie Bostock on could better sleep improve your health span, how to sleep for health, happiness and longevity. Dr. Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, Gavin. Now, I have to say, everyone, look, you do not need me to tell you that sleep is important. Unless you have had your head in the sand for the last couple of decades, I'm sure you've heard in the news, on magazines, newspaper reports, that lack of sleep increases the risk for all sorts of undesirable health outcomes, whether it's anxiety, accidents, depression, diabetes, dementia, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, stroke, schizophrenia. Whatever it is, lack of sleep seems to be associated with an increased risk. And if you picked up Matthew Walker's bestseller, Why We Sleep, you will have read all sorts of terrifying sounding statistics, such as routinely sleeping less than 6 or 7 hours a night demolishes your immune system, more than doubling your risk of cancer. So I have a hunch that you are watching this talk, hopefully because you're interested, but also probably because you're a little bit worried. Perhaps you struggle to fall asleep at night, or perhaps you wake up multiple times through the night and really have difficulty getting back to sleep. Or perhaps you wake up in the morning feeling exhausted and wishing that you could just get a little bit more sleep. And while we can all agree that good sleep is really good for us, the more you worry about it, the worse your sleep becomes. So here today, I'm here to encourage you to prioritize sleep, but my goal is also to reassure you so that you're not worrying unnecessarily and so that you feel empowered, that you know what to do to make the most of your sleep and to wake up with more energy. So we will have time to answer your questions, but over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to go through what happens when we sleep and how this changes naturally as we age. I'll talk about how much sleep we really need. And yes, this does change as we get older. And then I'll explain the 3 systems which control the timing and quality of your sleep so that you know which levers you can change to optimize the quality of your sleep. And hopefully, by the time we get to Q&A, every one of you will have at least one new idea that you want to test to see whether it can improve your health span. So the first question is, why health span? This idea around sleep and health span was inspired by a recent book that I read called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, The Science and Art of Longevity. And Dr. Attia makes the point that modern medicine has traditionally focused on saving lives. It's all about living longer. But there is very little point in extending our lifespan if we're miserable. And he argues that far more important is health span. That period of life when we're not suffering from disability or disease, or at least when we're functioning well, cognitively, physically, and emotionally. So if you already live with one or more chronic illnesses, it doesn't mean it's too late. It's about making the most of managing that condition to optimize well-being for as long as possible. So how do we do it? Well, if you are not into extreme, ultra-risky sports like base jumping and you don't do a lot of texting and driving, statistically speaking, the odds are that you and I will be polished off by one of the 4 major chronic diseases of aging. Dr. Attia calls these the 4 horsemen, and they are heart disease, cancer, dementia or neurodegenerative diseases, and type 2 diabetes and associated metabolic dysfunction. And these 4 conditions polish off around about 80% of people in the industrialized world. Now, at the start of this talk, I did say that too little sleep is associated with increased risks of all of these things. But just because there is an increased risk, it doesn't necessarily mean that lack of sleep is actually a cause of these diseases. Chronic diseases take decades to develop, and they are influenced by all sorts of factors. So actually pinpointing the role of something that's as changeable as sleep is really hard. So we have to rely on different types of evidence. We have observational studies, we have short-term trials, we have lab studies, so that we can make the best kind of educated guess about the role of sleep in developing disease. So as I go through the talk, I would encourage you to keep in mind kind of the links between sleep and the 4 horsemen in particular, and try and decide for yourself. Do you think that changing your sleep patterns could have an impact on your health span? Okay. So, what actually happens when we sleep? Well, sleep physiologist Alan Rechtschaffen said, if sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. And he had a point. I mean, when we're sleeping, we're not eating, we're not creating new offspring, we are entirely vulnerable to predators. So if it was trivial, surely we would have evolved without it. Hopefully on the screen you will see a picture of me looking very tired on my row around Britain 2 years ago, wearing an electroencephalogram or EEG to measure the electrical activity in my brain while I slept. And this type of device helps us to define 4 stages of sleep, which we cycle through multiple times per night. And I've shown here a hypnogram, which outlines what these sleep cycles look like for a healthy young adult. So we start with stage 1 sleep. This is a light transition stage into sleep, kind of halfway between sleep and daydreaming. Sometimes people get that sensation of falling and then suddenly wake up with a jerk called a hypnagogic jerk, which is completely harmless, by the way. Now, stage 1 usually only lasts about 5 or 10 minutes, and it's not very restorative. More important and exciting is stage 2 sleep. Now, stage 2 is often called true sleep, and we spend about 50% of our nights in stage 2. So heart rate and breathing rate start to slow down, body temperature starts to fall. And with fewer sort of inputs to process, the brain can actually start getting to work, starting to consolidate memories. In particular, if you're learning a new motor skill, so for example, a musical instrument, it's stage 2 sleep that helps those movements to become more fluid. If you're lucky, after about 40 minutes, you'll pass from stage 2 into stage 3, or deep, slow wave sleep. And this is the most physically restorative stage of sleep. So blood pressure and stress hormones reach their lowest levels, giving the cardiovascular system a chance to recover. But it's a very active phase physically. So it's when most of our growth hormone is produced. The immune system goes to work fighting infection. We repair damaged cells, and we also mop up the inflammation, which helps to contribute to heart disease. We also transfer memories from this tiny little short-term memory bank in our hippocampus, which is like weenie in one either side of the brain, into the much larger cortex, which has a lot more capacity, and that frees up more capacity for learning the following day. It's recently been discovered that the gaps between brain cells actually open up, actually widen during deep sleep, allowing more circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. And this actually sucks out some nasty toxins called beta amyloid and tau, which have been implicated in Alzheimer's disease. Now, I know what you're thinking, Gavin. You're thinking deep, slow wave sleep sounds like it's pretty good stuff for protecting us from the 4 horsemen. And you're absolutely right. But as recently as last month, a new study told us that it's even more important than we realised. So we've known for a long time that people who don't sleep a lot are at higher risks of diabetes. They struggle to control their blood sugar. In healthy people, just one night with 4 hours sleep is enough to increase insulin resistance the next morning, reducing the body's ability to take out glucose from the blood. In this new study, which was published by Matthew Walker's group at Berkeley, they showed that it's specifically slow wave sleep oscillations which we need to improve insulin sensitivity and control blood sugar the next day. After deep sleep, sleep becomes lighter again, and we enter REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, which is when most of our dreaming occurs. So sleep cycles in the first part of the night tend to include more deep sleep, and then in the second part of the night we have more REM sleep. We still don't fully understand the role of dreams, but one theory is that it's the brain's effort to slot new memories into the much kind of larger contextual bank of information. So we run through recent memories, imagined memories, to try and make sense of information and solve problems. REM sleep is also very important for processing emotions, both strengthening emotionally important memories and pruning back the unimportant ones so that we can look back on previous memories without having to relive the emotional content of that experience. So all of this, it sounds pretty good, pretty compelling. It's pretty clear that if we don't sleep for long enough, we're going to miss out on all of these restorative processes. But for some of you, you may have been looking at that hypnogram going, my sleep doesn't look anything like that. And you could well be right. The diagram that I showed is a typical diagram that gets used on the internet to demonstrate what sleep cycles look like. But the truth is that post-retirement, your sleep is pretty unlikely to look the same. In fact, you may see on the screen now a more typical hypnogram for retirees. And this is a bit messier. And as we age, we see natural changes in sleep patterns. So it takes longer to fall asleep. Sleep becomes more fragmented and fragile. We're more likely to wake up multiple times through the night. We spend less time asleep overall, and crucially, we get less slow wave sleep and more light stage 1 and stage 2 sleep. I know, it's hardly fair. Just at that time in life that we want to batter away the 4 horsemen, we start to lose the protective power of deep sleep. But the good news is that deterioration in sleep quality, while very common, is not entirely inevitable. The key reason to show you this is actually to reassure you that if you are waking up multiple times through the night, it doesn't mean that you have a sleep problem. This just could be a natural gap between sleep cycles. So if you worry less about waking up, the chances are you'll find it much easier to fall back to sleep. We'll come back to that. So, having established that most of us are not going to have exactly the same kind of sleep in our 80s as we are in our 20s, I think it's also worth thinking about what's realistic to aim for. So, sleep experts recommend that most adults of working age up to the age of 65 need between 7 and 9 hours sleep for optimal functioning. But they note that there is a natural variation. As little as 6 or as much as 10 may be appropriate for some people. So, for example, Kenyan record-breaking marathon runner Eliud Kipchoge is quite famed for saying that he needs 10 hours of sleep, 8 hours at night and 2 hours as a long nap during the day. He's very physically active and he needs more sleep to recover. So our sleep need depends on our genetics, our age, and our activity during the day. Now, if you're over the age of 65, the recommendation actually reduces to 7 to 8 hours. But crucially, scientists still agree that as little as 5 or 6 hours sleep or as much as 9 hours sleep may be appropriate. It's basically a bell-shaped curve where most people sit in the middle, but some people will need a little bit less and some people will require a little bit more. So the obvious question is, how do you know whether you're getting enough sleep? Well, just ask yourself, do you wake up in the morning without the need for an alarm? Do you feel quite alert all day without relying on caffeine or sugar or really long naps to keep you going? Do you sleep in at weekends? Do you feel snappy and irritable for no reason at all? Do you doze off in front of the TV or in online talks like this? You are the best judge of whether or not you are getting enough sleep. Whether that's 5, 6, 7, 8, or even 9 hours sleep. And hopefully that is a relief to some of you. But I appreciate that if you routinely sleep for 6 hours or less, it's quite hard not to get concerned by headlines such as this one. Sleeping less than 6 hours a night in midlife raises risk of dementia by 30%. Now, I read this and I was pretty concerned. It sounds pretty scary until you actually dig into the details. So this headline referred to a study in which 8,000 civil servants were asked how much sleep they got in their 50s, then again in their 60s, and again in their 70s. Over 25 years, 6.5% or 6.5 hours every 100 developed dementia. People who slept for 6 hours or less at all 3 age groups, so in their 50s, 60s and 70s, were called persistent short sleepers. And in that persistent short sleep group, 7.6% developed dementia versus 5.3% of those people who slept for 7 hours or more. So yes, short sleep was definitely associated significantly with a higher risk. But actually, 92.4% of persistent short sleepers didn't develop dementia over that 25-year time period. So if your sleep isn't brilliant, you can still dial up the other aspects of healthier lifestyles to protect your health span, regular exercise, healthier diet, as well as adopting the healthier sleep habits that we'll come on to shortly. So there is an open question about whether or not you can get too much sleep. Statistically, studies have found that people who sleep for more than 9 hours are also at increased risk of the four horsemen. Now, all of them can disrupt sleep in the early stages, so high blood sugar, deposits of beta amyloid, and high levels of inflammation all interfere with sleep quality. So one theory is that possibly in those studies, the long sleepers were already showing early signs of disease, even though they may not have been diagnosed. Or it could be that when people sleep for a long time, it's an indicator that they're getting very poor quality sleep. So if you're regularly getting 9 hours sleep or more and you're still struggling to stay awake during the day, it may be that there's something else going on. And the most common culprit for excessive daytime sleepiness is a sleep-related breathing disorder called sleep apnea. Now, this is not the same as snoring. So snoring is the sound of vibration as air is passed through a narrowing of our airways. And it's usually because the soft tissue in the tongue or the back of the throat has collapsed during deep sleep. It's relaxed, creating a narrowing. So you get this vibration sound like this. Now, it's pretty irritating, but is mainly harmless, except from the irritation of your partner. In sleep apnea, however, there are temporary pauses, sometimes followed by a gasping for breath. So you might get something like this. And then the person goes back to snoring or sleeping. Every time you get this pause in breathing, the brain has a little mini panic and actually wakes you out of deep sleep into a lighter stage of sleep. Now, if this happens a couple of times a night, that's fine. But these micro arousals can actually happen hundreds of times a night. So when the sleeper wakes up in the morning, they think they've been asleep for 9 hours. But the hypnogram actually shows that they spent the whole time in light sleep and they missed out on that juicy, restorative, slow-wave sleep. So anyone can suffer from sleep apnea, but it does become more common with increasing age as we tend to lose a little bit of muscular tone in the airways. I partly mention this because sleep apnea hit the headlines recently when President Biden was seen to have some indents around his mouth in a morning briefing. And it turns out that he was being treated for sleep apnea using something called a CPAP machine, or continuous positive airway pressure device. And that's kind of the gold standard. But there are lots of other treatment options, including something like this. This is a mandibular advancement device, which actually pushes the jaw forward so that it doesn't collapse while you're asleep. But also there are muscular exercises and weight loss that you can do that will help to reduce the severity of sleep apnea. So if you're a bit concerned that this might impact on you or your partner, then take a leaf out of President Biden's book and go and ask your GP or healthcare team about it. But for those of you who have been sitting there patiently thinking, yes, but what can I do? The time has come. There may well be influences on your sleep that you can't change. Caring responsibilities, aging, medication, pain, or breathlessness. But no matter what the obstacles that you face, I would still argue that we can all improve the quality of our sleep if we understand the 3 systems which control the timing and quality of our sleep. These are circadian rhythms, sleep pressure, and the stress system. And all 3 of these work independently. So if I'm going through and you're thinking, oh, I can't change that, then don't worry. Even working on 1 out of the 3 could still have some benefits. So let's start with circadian rhythms. Most of us think about sleep as something that happens at night, but really our alertness runs on a continuous 24-hour cycle. For an average adult, our alertness cycle looks something like this. Alertness builds gradually through the morning, takes a natural dip after lunch between about 1 and 3 when you may crave a siesta. Then things pick up again in the late afternoon, peaking at around 4 or 5 p.m. As it gets dark in the evening, alertness slides to encourage the onset of sleep. This 24-hour pattern is called a circadian rhythm, circa meaning about, dian meaning day. Early birds, young children, and elderly people tend to have a rhythm which starts and finishes earlier in the day, so you may find yourself waking up at dawn feeling perfectly alert, whereas teenagers and night owls tend to have a delayed rhythm, so they'll probably only naturally wake up after 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and they want to stay awake late at night. It's not just alertness which follows this 24-hour pattern. In fact, we have circadian rhythms for every physiological function: temperature, reaction time, blood pressure, appetite, digestion, and so on. Every single cell in our bodies carries instructions to operate on this 24-hour cycle. Circadian rhythms are the body's logistics function. They ensure that the right things get to the right places at the right times. And our body clocks have evolved to help us be really good at being active and to eat during daylight hours and to recover and repair ourselves at night while we sleep, when it's dark. So, what does this all mean? What is the number one way to improve sleep quality? It is to get out of bed at the same time every day, no matter how much sleep you've had the night before. Let me explain that. A consistent wake-up time anchors all of your body clocks so that they're in sync and working efficiently. The brain starts to anticipate your wake-up time by releasing the hormone cortisol, which helps to trigger the release of glucose, fires you up for energy, and means that you will wake up before your alarm feeling alert. About 90 minutes before your typical bedtime, the pineal gland in the brain starts to produce melatonin, which is a signpost to let the rest of the brain and body know that it's time to prepare for sleep. But if you have a haphazard schedule, so for example, if you start sleeping in on weekends or you have very long naps mid-afternoon, your body clocks can get confused. They can get out of sync with each other and with the light-dark cycle of the sun. This is called circadian desynchrony, and it leads to feelings of fatigue and feeling unwell. It's the same thing that you get in an exaggerated form when you have jet lag. Circadian desynchrony caused by shift work is thought to increase the risk of breast cancer. Now, unfortunately, as we get older, our circadian signals get weaker. So we have a master clock in the brain which organises all the other clocks. But as we get older, it seems to lose some of its organising potency. We also start to produce less of the sleep signalling hormone melatonin as we age. Fortunately, we can help our body clocks to get back in sync with each other and improve the quality of our sleep by using signals called Zeitgebers, time givers. And what is the strongest Zeitgeber? Bright light. Light lands on receptors in the back of the eye and sends a message to the master clock that it's time to be alert. This then cascades the messages to the rest of the body. So ideally, we want exposure to bright natural light in the first hour of the day to kind of kickstart our clocks for that day. But there's really good evidence that actually exposure to natural light other times of the day can also improve your mood and cognitive function, even if you can't get outside during the day. People who work next to a window have been shown to actually have better sleep and sleep for longer than those people who don't work next to a window. So if you can't get outside, at least kind of move where you're sitting so that you've got proximity to natural light. You can The opposite, of course, is true before you go to bed. So bright light late at night can still have an alerting effect, which is why it's a good idea to dim overhead lights and avoid bright screens in the last couple of hours before bed, especially the last 90 minutes. You can improve the quality of your sleep by making your bedroom as dark as possible, using blackout blinds or using an eye mask. One recent study compared people who slept in almost complete darkness with having a nightlight on. Just a dim light, not enough to read by. And they actually showed that when you sleep in a room with a nightlight on, you tend to have a slightly elevated heart rate. You spend less time in deep sleep, and there is increased insulin resistance, that hallmark sign of diabetes, the following morning. The other main Zeitgebers which can influence the timing of your body clock include meal times, vigorous movement or exercise, and also increases in temperature. So in the evening, try and avoid big meals in that last sort of 2 hours before bed. Try not to do anything too vigorous in that last hour before bed. And if possible, keep the bedroom cool. Now, I know that's a problem if you've got a heat wave on, for example, but try and keep the bedroom a little bit cooler than the rest of the house. One thing you can do to actually help the body to cool before bed is to have a warm bath or shower. And this sounds counterintuitive, but when you're surrounded by warm water, it actually pushes blood flow to the extremities in an attempt to cool you down. And then as you get out of the bath or shower, your body temperature will cool quite quickly. So we know that having a warm bath, warm shower, or even a foot bath can actually help you to get into deep sleep more quickly. Okay, so those were strategies to improve your circadian rhythms. The second system, which influences sleep quality and timing, is called sleep pressure. Now, this is a little bit more straightforward. The longer we're awake, the more we build up a pressure to sleep. During our waking hours, there is a waste substance called adenosine, which builds up in the brain and makes us feel drowsy. And the more physically active we are, or the more hours we've been awake, the more of this drowsy-inducing adenosine is there in the brain. So when sleep pressure from adenosine is high and the alerting signal from our body clocks is weak, we fall asleep. Now, the only way to reset sleep pressure is to sleep, which breaks down the adenosine and resets sleep pressure for the following day. So if you're feeling particularly drowsy during the day and you need to re-energize, a 10 to 25 minute nap can be enough just to relieve sleep pressure a little bit and leave you feeling more alert for the next 2 or 3 hours. The best time for a nap is in that natural circadian lull after lunch. However, if you have a long nap or you nap late in the afternoon, you could end up resetting your sleep pressure so that by the time it gets to bedtime, you haven't got enough to fall asleep easily. Or even if you do fall asleep, you could be more likely to wake up in the middle of the night. So if you are a frequent napper, but you have this issue with waking up frequently, it's worth reducing the length of that nap or perhaps ditch it altogether and see what impacts that has. There is a commonly used drug which can interfere with the effects of sleep pressure. Caffeine. Caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors in the brain and temporarily fools it into thinking that you're not sleepy. Now, for most people, a strong cup of coffee, even 6 hours before bed, can still interfere with the quality of your sleep. So the general recommendation is to avoid caffeine at least 6 hours before bed, but we are all a little bit different, so it may take a bit of personal experimentation. Caffeine also carries risks of tolerance, where you have to keep drinking more to have the same effects, and also dependence, where when you stop consuming it at a set time, you'll actually start to experience withdrawal effects. So I love caffeine, but I have shifted almost entirely to decaf unless I really need to stay awake. So for example, on a long drive, I would say use it strategically rather than routinely. The key thing to remember about sleep pressure is that if you haven't got enough of it or you're masking it with stimulants, it's going to be very hard to fall asleep at night. Regular exercise is one of the best ways to naturally build up sleep pressure and to improve sleep quality. And the really good news is that it doesn't have to be particularly intensive. There have been a number of studies which have actually compared doing something like yoga or Tai Chi, which is not particularly intensive, and compared it to conventional exercise. And they've showed that over the period of 6 weeks, there's really no difference. Both groups will improve their sleep quality. So for a natural sleep improver, regular exercise is one of the best. Okay, so some of you may be sitting there thinking, I don't drink caffeine, I wake up at the same time, I get outside a lot, and I even practice yoga. Why can't I sleep? And there is a third system that can actually throw a spanner in the works of the other two, and that is the stress system. So all of our automatic processes like breathing and heart rate and digestion are controlled by two opposing arms of the autonomic or automatic nervous system. So you've got the fight or flight sympathetic response, which fires you up for action, mobilizes you. And then you've got the rest or digest parasympathetic nervous system, which you need to digest and recover and get into deep sleep. And these two are kind of in constant flux. Now, if you feel tense, angry, or anxious in that last few hours before bed, the fight or flight response kicks off. We release adrenaline, which increases heart rate and blood pressure, makes your muscles feel tense, you sweat. Our brains focus in on the source of that stress, so we find it very difficult to concentrate on anything else. We produce cortisol, which releases glucose into the bloodstream. Cortisol interferes with the actions of melatonin, making it harder to get into deep sleep. So we're tired, but wired. Even if we fall asleep, the moment that we've paid off a little bit of that sort of sleep pressure, we're actually more likely to wake up, especially in the early hours of the morning. So to manage the stress response and to help your brain and body to stay asleep for longer, you've got to convince the brain that you are safe and secure and not under threat. In other words, you need to relax. And by relaxing, I mean more than just kind of switching on the TV and sitting on the sofa. Relaxation is a skill. It's what you do to release tension and worry, and it takes practice to get really good at it. The awkward curveball of sleep deprivation is that when you get too little sleep, it actually gets harder to relax. And in order to understand why, you've got to kind of think back 200,000 years ago or so to when our ancestors were living camped out on the savannah. What sort of things would have kept our ancestors awake at night? Saber-toothed tigers, storms, hunger, scary stuff. And over hundreds of thousands of years, our brains have evolved to interpret sleep loss as meaning that we could be in danger. So what happens is they dial up the stress response. They kind of shift into a high alert mode. Chronic stress and chronic lack of sleep can recalibrate that stress balance so that it's permanently in the on position. We get hyper aroused and struggle to switch off. So how can we shift that switch? I'm going to tell you a few ideas, but they do all require practice. So firstly, it turns out that a consistent bedtime routine is not just for hyperactive toddlers, but can be really helpful for adults as well. So if you do the same things in the same order before you go to bed, your brain starts to associate these activities with readiness for sleep. It feels in control, it's predictable. The key is to include something that you're going to look forward to, that you actually find calming and enjoyable. So it might be a warm bath or shower, we've already discussed. It might be listening to music, practicing gentle yoga or stretching, meditation or reading a book. Anything which involves slowing your breathing rate and releasing tension from your muscles is likely to help you sleep. And there's actually a recent Saga Spaces talk on mindfulness meditation, which I really recommend if that's not something that you have tried before. If you do wake up during the night, remind yourself that waking up a few times is normal. Check in to see if you're too hot or thirsty or need the toilet, and then settle back down to sleep. if you're worried that a tsunami of thoughts is going to take over, say to yourself the word the. 2 seconds later, say it again. The. 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 This is really boring and can form an effective mask against other thoughts. Trying harder to sleep will likely not work. The more time you spend lying in bed worrying about not being able to sleep, the more your brain starts to learn that your bed is a place of frustration, and the more entrenched your sleep problem will become. So to build a more positive bed-sleep connection, firstly, only get into bed when you're sleepy tired. And secondly, if you're awake for 15 or 20 minutes, get up. Get out of bed, go somewhere else in your home and do something distracting. Read a book, even watch TV, until your eyelids start to feel heavy, and only then get back into bed. If you do this consistently, you'll start to feel more in control of your sleep, and your bed will start to feel like that relaxing haven that it ought to be, rather than a battleground. Now, all of these strategies are based on an approach that I would heartily recommend, the number one sort of therapy for insomnia, which is called cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia. So there you have it. We've talked a bit about what happens when we sleep and why we sleep, and deep sleep in particular is a pretty epic defence against the four horsemen. We've discussed the fact that sleep in your 80s is unlikely to be the same as in your 20s, but by supporting your circadian rhythms, by building up sleep pressure, and by soothing the stress response, we all have opportunities to improve sleep quality. But the best way to know whether changing your sleep habits will improve your health span is to experiment, to become a scientist of your own sleep. So try something new. Go for a walk, sign up for Tai Chi, cut out caffeine, or have a warm bath before bed. Set yourself this challenge for 2 weeks and see whether it makes a difference for you. I have seen time and time again that when people adopt these very simple habits, it can have a transformative effect on their sleep, improve their mood, improve their energy, and I believe, improve their health span.
Thank you, Dr. Sophie Bostock, for your fascinating talk. Much appreciated. And also, thank you to our audience members for watching as well. I hope to see you next time on our Saga Spaces Talk.